Everybody, thanks very much for attending. Donna, you drew a great crowd. Everybody's really interested in hearing what you have to say.
You only hope what I have to say is what they're interested in hearing.
Well, just before we get started, so Donna, of course, government affairs and government relations and community affairs with Cruise Line International Association Northwestern Canada. She's just the guru in terms of cruise industry here in British Columbia. At least if you have a question, go to Donna. That's the only other thing I'm going to say. Remind you, everybody, go on mute so that Donna has a free range for speaking. And what we're going to do is afterwards, we'll have some good discussion. I hope you guys have your questions ready. We're also going to switch up our agenda a little bit and do the port and member activity updates before we go into the association business, just in case there are people on the call that want to hear the port activity updates, but don't want to go through the minutes and the resolutions and all that. So Donna, with that, it's right on 4 o'clock, and I'm going to let you just go for it. Put myself on mute.
Thanks, Jane, and thanks for the introduction. I'm not sure I can live up to all of that, but we'll give it my best shot. So the CLIA member lines are continuing. The feedback here. Are we okay with this? CLIA member lines are continuing discussions with various government regulators, business partners, and the agencies in both Canada and the U.S. And actually, we're scheduled to speak with Transport Canada again next week regarding the current interim order, hoping that the plans that are being put in place and the protocols will lead us to closer to resumption of sailing in Canadian waters. You're probably all aware that the CDC has issued a conditional framework for the resumption of cruise in the U.S., and I'll touch on that a little bit later in my comments. But while our hope is that the Canadian government will consider and may parallel the initiatives underway by the CDC in the U.S., we have to remind ourselves that Canada may choose to add its own criteria and look to the recent FDA approval for the return of the Boeing 737 MAX, because Canada did exactly that. They waited for FDA to put their criteria in place, and then we added a few that are Canadian-centric. So most recently in December, CLIA announced the member policy for SARS, COVID-2, and COVID-19 policy that applies to all ocean-going cruise vessels worldwide, carrying 100 passengers or more, 100 persons or more rather, and traveling on itineraries in international waters. So the policy recognizes a four-phase approach to resumption of cruising and operations, and they have some key components. So initial restart, demonstrating the effectiveness of the protocols, availability of treatment, effective treatments, and vaccines, and lastly, what the new normal might look like. Next is a consideration for ship configurations and sanitation and designated isolation cabins, management of onboard populations, for a number of things, including the ability for physical distancing, and measures related to crew training, frequency of testing, the use of masks, for example. So the measures for there's measures also in place for passenger communication through the full spectrum of the cruise experience, including at the time of booking, prior to embarkation, on board the ships, and at the destinations. Policies that pertain to case detection and management and response mobilization. So a full description and outline of the policies is available from the CLIA website at cruising.org, and I can send that link to Jane if she'd like to distribute it, make it a little easier for people to find. So the question that I and others, and I'm sure you will be the first one at the top of your list, get asked the most is, when can we expect cruise to start again? So There are several considerations that influence the answer to that question, and the most influential is timing. So this is where the CDC conditional framework comes into play. So it is a topic of review and discussion between CDC and the member cruise lines probably daily. There are conditions in the framework. Some of the technical explanations are not there. There's some ambiguity. You know, they say testing, but they don't say what kind of testing. They say that, you know, that's not explicit as to how often and whether it's before, during, after kind of stuff. So, but on the timing front, the framework calls for CDC to respond within 30 days to an application to conduct a simulated sailing. If approved, the cruise line is required to conduct that simulation within 60 days. So considerations for the cruise line include that within that time frame, and so do you start this when you make your application on the chance that you might get approved. They have to reinstate the crew complement. They have to look for the various technical evaluations that, you know, is it just crew or is it more people than, you know, some volunteers to go on. Then there's the audit of the simulation. And after all of that, green light goes forward. The potential, you know, the cruise lines still have to have potential guest interest and a commitment to a cruise holiday. So, you know, there's still some other factors that are influencing all of this. Our border closure, the criteria around air travel, and I was just reading some of the most recent orders by the new president in the U.S., and, you know, there's some stuff that's going on down there to ensure that people coming in to the country have had tests, negative tests, can provide that information. And then we go back to what is the test and how is that confirmed and how is it provided to the authorities. So we're all hopeful that a vaccine will become more readily available. It may well influence the return of cruising in North America, but certainly in Canada, we're seeing challenges to having that distributed and our population gaining from that. So, you know, the aspects of everyday life have been impacted, but I think that, you know, we can possibly agree, we might not all agree, but in the tourism sector, I don't think anybody's been as adversely affected as the cruise industry. You know, there are others who we're all suffering in some form, but I'm not aware of anybody else that's been completely shut down. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have that I might not have already answered. And
sure. In terms of, let's just in terms of moderating this, maybe anybody that wants to ask a question, if you just put your hand up. Donna, I have actually two questions. Number one, the simulation you're discussing, sorry, is that per ship?
Good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, Jane. I don't know if they have to do it on a per ship basis, if they have to do it on a per port basis. You know, like I said, there's just some technical aspects of the framework that, you know, that are missing. I mean, how many, you know, do they have to do one with, you know, just crew? Do they then another one where they take some passengers? Where does the audit take place? You know, what level is the audit at? Is it just CDC that does the audit, or will they allow the cruise lines to bring their own health experts into it? You know, I think these are all good questions that we're all hoping to get the answer to.
And I'm guessing you wouldn't know the answer to this as well, but that port ship interface, would the port be involved in that audit as well, like using their resources too to do it?
I think it's going to depend, Jane, a lot on where those initial cruises take place. So because the cruise lines do operate their own terminals in some ports, and they may choose, ultimately that is the environment that they have, the best availability to use, or control of, or can get staff. I mean, some of the ships are tied up, and maybe that's part of the consideration.
Okay. The other question I have is more of a bigger picture at how the lines themselves are holding up. I mean, you're losing hundreds of millions of dollars. Like new ships, have you like the order book, has that been sort of put on hold? Wait, maybe just the position of the lines themselves in terms of how they're managing through this.
Well, I think that they've taken many drastic measures to manage through this. We've seen some ships that have gone for breakup that probably we wouldn't have expected to see for breakup this year, or last year rather, and again this year. We've seen layoffs of staff in the head offices, furloughs, layoffs. People are working from home, but still there's expenses. There's still staff on the ships that keep them ready, not ready to go, but maintain them in order. So I mean, there's lots in the news that says at the beginning they were losing billions of dollars, and based on large millions of dollars every month, and I think some of that has come down as they've put ships into basically lay up and facilitated their maintenance on a different timeline.
Okay.
But there are ships, in the last 2-3 months, new ships that have rolled out of, that are brand new and have rolled out of, the places where they've been built. I think there's still some that are partially constructed that are due for delivery this year, and then again there are some that have been put on hold. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to open it up now. We've got 48 people on the call, so my apologies if I can't see you, but does anybody else have a question right now? Maybe hands might be easiest. There we go. Eleanor has it. Why don't we start with Eleanor then?
Okay. I'm curious that with the US-Canada border closure, if there's been talk about kind of an interim getting back to sea step of just domestic cruising. I know our Seattle-based ships typically do like a Vancouver stop to get around Jones Act. So is there at least intra-BC or intra-Washington cruising that's being considered in the nearer term?
Eleanor, I think the answer to that question is until the cruise lines can, figure out what it's going to take to sail from a U.S. port, with the CDC orders and the framework, and everybody's kind of been waiting with bated breath too for the new administration in the U.S. There's a new director of the CDC in the U.S. and I haven't heard any talk about that. But the CDC's framework says that any cruise that starts will have a maximum 7-day itinerary. So what I do know is that, for instance, Windstar have pulled out of North America for this year because they don't offer 7-day itineraries. So we're seeing the impact of some of this already, but how they will start that up, it's the Passenger Vessel Services Act that's our little problem, and that is a problem for the U.S. So that is a U.S. requirement. You go from the U.S. to a foreign port before you return to the port that you left. And if you can't do that, then CBP has a lot of criteria around that. It's not Transport Canada. It's not Canada that's saying no, you can't come here unless you go there first, kind of thing. That's not our deal.
Thanks.
I see Edgar, you have a question? You had your hand up?
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Canada. Edgar Gold in Brisbane, Australia. On a very hot sunny day, 31 degrees here. It's only 10 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, one of the things which I wanted to say, Australia, which is a fairly strong cruising sector, I think it's even stronger really than Canada. The government has just announced that cruise shipping will be the most restricted. It will be the last permitted into the country. In fact, Australians at the moment are not permitted to travel overseas at all. And the Prime Minister said it's unlikely that that restriction will be lifted before the end of the year. So that's a double whammy. That basically means that cruise ships are not permitted to come down here, and Australians are not permitted to go overseas to join a cruise ship.
So Edgar, my sympathies lie in the fact that my son lives in Sydney and I can't go and visit him. So I get it. But we do have, CLIA does have an office in Australia that deals with Australia and New Zealand. They are working very hard to see some kind of itinerary, so similar to what you see happening in Singapore, in Greece, in Italy, where they stay within the country, within that bubble, if you will, and it's not international travel. Now, some of the problems around that, of course, are related to crew and how long crews have been on board, and that, you know, they need to go home and see their families too, and so there's a change out, and then there's all that international travel stuff gets all wrapped up into crew changes, and we see that here in Canada for our merchant marine and crew changes. So yes, I'm aware of Australia, keenly aware. My daughter lives in New Zealand, so yeah. But I know that the group down there, the CLIA group down there, are doing everything that they can to work through that.
Sounds good. Does anybody else, again, use the chat or use the hands up under reactions on your computer, and I'll try and find you. Anybody else looking for a question?
Oh, this group's way too easy.
Oh, there we go, Billy. Hey, Billy.
Yeah, just a quick question there. What about the European front? I know you mentioned Greece and Italy, but Europe, Norway, Iceland, any of these other countries looking at following sort of what the U.S. does, or CDC guidelines? I mean, I know the CDC doesn't apply to them, but I saw where the CDC had extended their no cruising till September 1. And I'm not sure when that went into effect, but I just saw it yesterday. And just a thought.
So Billy, the thing with Europe is that even before the CDC came out with their conditional framework, so last year, Europe came out with some protocols and return to cruise, and so there was some stuff that happened. There were some cruises, MSC and Costa, in Italy and in Greece that happened. They got off. You know, there were, I think MSC was in the order of 30 cruises, but again, completely within the country. And they met some guidelines and protocols and policies that were put in place there. You might remember the news story about the people who didn't stay in their bubble and decided to go off on a little tour somewhere by themselves, and they got refused, re-entry to the ship when she sailed. So it has happened. The CDC, as you mentioned, does not have the, they're a U.S. entity. I know, it's not that I expect, it's that I know that Transport Canada and the Public Health Authority of Canada have meetings with CDC. They've been linked on other health-related initiatives in the past, and I expect that, we'll see that, what the path forward that they look to will have some influence on what we do here in Canada. But in the UK, in the places in the Baltic that you've mentioned, and in the Mediterranean, of course, with this new variant and winter and and COVID, taking a second round out of us all, it's pretty much come to a grinding halt. I think the only ones that are still currently sailing are in Singapore.
Is there, I wanted to try and point out Stephanie from Business Oregon. She gave me a report. I didn't get a chance to read it all, but had some great insights. There she is. Stephanie, do you want to just talk about a little bit about that report and the insights that were there?
Sure, I'm happy to be here tonight. For the record, my name is Stephanie Preibel. I represent ports programming for the state of Oregon. Business Oregon is the state's economic development department. I'm happy to see Paula and Kim here, just some familiar faces to say hi to. When I saw the meeting notice, I definitely took note of cruise ship industry, absolutely empathetic to the industry impact in Oregon and of course across our respective jurisdictions. The last couple months, Business Oregon has been working with ports, trying to track what the impacts of COVID-19 have been specifically in Oregon. There was a lot of stop, start, stop again, until it just completely came to a halt. One of the things that we coordinated with was the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Maritime Commission. They were doing surveys and really just trying to understand the industry. They were understanding how ports contracting was going, what the protocols could be to keep things open. I worked closely with General Counsel for one of the commissioners, and they produced a report for the Northwest United States region. So it was Canada, Oregon, Washington, Alaska. It may be of interest to some of our friends here from the BC region on this call. They talked about larger industry implications than what Oregon has experienced. We had significant impacts for Astoria as our coastal port. We also reported the impacts of river cruises that go along the Columbia River, but they were just underneath, I think, what the threshold was for passengers that the Federal Maritime Commission was looking at. So I sent the report to Jane. She can distribute it out. It's public record. It's something that's posted on the Federal Maritime Commission. They too continue to track this issue and try to make best policy decisions moving forward. But I was interested in this call, again, empathetic to the cruise lines and just trying to keep pace with this issue so I can provide ports with the best information as they move forward for contracting.
Excellent, thanks. I will post that along with the notes. If anybody's interested, we'll get it onto our website as well. It looks really interesting. And I know it even, like, I started focusing on the Alaska side as well, and there's quite a significant impact. Okay, so any other questions for either Donna or for Stephanie?
So Jane, just sorry.
Okay, wait, Kim, I'll get Donna back.
So Jane, I just wanted to say that there are a number, to Stephanie's point, there are a number of efforts, to examine, to review how, in what the best policies and practices are. One of them is a Future Borders Coalition that is being driven, Washington, BC, Alaska. It's sort of a Penwar kind of offshoot. And they have a marine subcommittee. And so Peter Exotta from the Port of Vancouver and Donnie Brown, who is with the Marine Policy Group at CLIA, are the co-chairs of that subcommittee. And the objective of that group and what a lot of people are thinking about and looking at is that it's the whole experience. It's not just what happens in the port. It's people getting to the community, whether they come by air, whether they come by train, car, walk, bicycle, however they get here. And then what's next? What's next? Are you going to get tested at the airport and, all of a sudden you got off the plane, but oops, somebody missed something on the way and now you can't keep on going? Then what happens to that guest? Or, they get onto the, they make that transition through the community, whatever their first level of transportation was, they get on the ship and off they go. And somewhere along the line, they've, in a community or however it happens, they're saying that they can find this virus in our food, which is really disturbing. you know, they become infected, and now they've got to come back again. How does that happen? And what happens if they get on board, you know, and there's another testing regime, and we find out about it then? And I mean, the you know, the parts to this are really complex, and in some instances quite difficult to put them all together and think them all through. But that's what we have to do.
Kim, I think you had a question.
I did. Thank you, Jane. Stephanie, first of all, nice to see you. And I hope if you can find your way to becoming a member, you can do that. We'd love to have you. And Donna, you spoke a little bit about the complexity. And I had a thought, and since you're an expert, I thought I'd just throw this out here. We've been talking about state to state and nation to nation and so forth, but I had a demographic question. There's a vast demographic difference between, say, a Disney and a Cunard. Are anybody considering whether or not certain lines could go based on their clientele rather than others?
Right now, the only consideration, Kim, that I have seen is the size of the vessel and how many persons, not passengers, but persons who are on board that vessel. And right now, the limit is 100, and that's every soul on board. Now, you know, our border with the U.S. is still closed. You know, that's a hurdle to start with. The health, from the health aspect, it's not just the authorities. It's not just CDC or the Health Authority of Canada. It's the provincial health authorities and the state health authorities. It actually wanders all the way back down into regional and community sentiment. I mean, we have, in British Columbia, we have one of the most influential provincial health officers in all of Canada. And Dr. Bonnie Henry says, it ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. And she can say that. She has the ability to say that. So, you know, on the state to state, on the state to province, country to country, it's, you know, I don't know where it's going to go. If somebody's got a crystal ball that's less murky than mine, I'd be delighted to hear it.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, Rita, I think you have a question.
Yeah, I do. I was wanting to say, in terms of jurisdictional, say, authority, you made a good point. Provincially, how the health minister, along with the premier, are really taking power of authority over a federally jurisdicted mode of transportation, which is federally governed and federally regulated, to actually make those decisions, make the decisions when typically they will not be making those decisions.
Maria, are you thinking about the idea that the province of BC would close its border with Alberta?
Well, you know, yeah, well, you know what, look, we have, I mean, I put out a call to the Minister of Transport and saying, why is it that federally, you know, we've got maritime airlines and railway governed under federal jurisdiction and legislation, but yet all the calls and all the decisions are being transferred, and the powers of those decisions under the laws are being passed to the health ministers, are being passed to the provincial leaders. And that's something that I think industry would question. They would have to question that. I mean, we have Horgan, who's made it clear the other day, to shake my head. He says, well, we're going to impose law if we can, but legally we might not have that power to not let anyone enter BC or leave BC. And I mean, I'm thinking, wow, you are not under the transport authority of the minister, but yet you're making these decisions.
So, Rita, there's a lot being said about Horgan's statements, and you know, I think that you know what, there isn't another premier in Canada that's said anything like that. You know, what they're trying to do is get everybody to stay home and you know, wear their mask and only go out if they have to. But you know, I mean, we could debate the politics of that until cows come home. So I'm not. That's not my jurisdiction.
No, I know what you're saying, and I mean, I think what I'm getting at is, like you mentioned, at the end of the day, the industry and the advocates of industry and the regulators under CLIA, or even, you see IATA going through the same issues, the International Airline Association, they're going through the same issues of jurisdictional governance. Each jurisdiction is going to make their own decisions because they got that sovereign ability to do that. So if they've got one decision that they're making, say in, let's say Brazil, and you've got cruises going through a certain trade lane that are going to go through that hub, but the country that it's going to embark next, it has a different jurisdictional agenda, and they're putting different stipulations not followed under the CDC. I mean, I think that's a challenge that you're going through, or any industry such as maritime, airlines, or rail are going to go through.
I think that the thing that we really have to consider is that the government's focus and the reason that we're doing the things that we're doing is because they're trying to protect all of us and our ability to take care of people, our health facilities. If they become overrun by some of the ones we're hearing about, I have to give them credit for doing some of the things that they're doing. But, when I say that, Health Canada's, they basically they're standalone. They run separate from the government. They advise the government, but they are not, they stand separate. The government takes their direction, and then they implement it. And because Transport Canada has jurisdiction over the ocean, then they're the policeman. But when I talk about communities and I talk about the provincial health ministers, leave our premier out of it for now.
Yeah.
Where we have to think here is that we have communities that are going to be concerned because there are people in our communities, our respective communities, who have nothing, absolutely nothing good to say about cruise. They don't see any benefit. They don't see any reason to have them in their community. So at some point, it has to come back to the confidence in the community that those ships and those guests are going to come under criteria and protocols that are still going to offer protection to the community. And that's where our provincial health officers come into play. And, where we have to have those relationships, which, believe me, we're working on, and, as well as the regulatory relationships within the Canadian government and the agencies that serve them.
Yes, no, that's understandable. Yeah, those communications definitely have to happen.
Does anybody else have any questions? Again, either under reactions or chat or...
Janie has her hand up.
Yep.
Wait, sorry,
So-
who does?
Jeannie,
Oh, Jeannie. Go for it, Jeannie.
So in Washington State, it's even worse. Our counties, health departments can make decisions. Now, we haven't, because cruises have been shut down, we haven't seen a county yet put their finger in that, but they're sure putting their finger in everything else. Our governor did combine counties up into regions, but those regions are starting to fall apart. I think if we don't see anything move out of phase 1 this week, we're gonna start seeing those especially in the central and eastern side of the state saying, we're out of here. We're not going to get stuck with this other county that's not doing any better. So it's going to be complicated. The other thing is, I heard that even if you get a vaccine, that does not prevent you or eliminate the testing. So even though we're all chasing this vaccine, if we still have to get tested 3-4 times a week, whether we're going across the Washington-Oregon border or we want to go into Canada for a meeting, that's going to be cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
well, and what test are you going to get?
Yeah, exactly.
And how long is it good?
Well, how long will it take you to get the results?
Right.
Yeah,
If I took it 2 days ago, that just meant 2 days ago when I dropped by that drugstore, I was fine, or send it, went to Costco, but that doesn't mean when I walk across the border with my mask on that I'm clear.
Well, and they're even, this is another rabbit hole that we can wander down to, but you know, there's even concern that the vaccine, you know, we have a new variant. The vaccine is supposedly not effective against the new variant.
Right.
In Canada, we don't have enough vaccines for Canadians, and we won't have, they're telling us, until September. So does that mean that Canadian government's going to look at this and they're going to say, well, you know, until all the Canadians are vaccinated, or those who want to be are vaccinated, we can't take the chance of people wandering around catching this, so we'll just, you know, the status quo will stick. You know, they're all really good questions, and you know, and as I said, if you got a clear crystal ball, I'll welcome anything you've got to add.
Okay, why don't we, I think maybe just one more short question if anybody has one, and then we'll get into the port activity updates. I don't see any, shout out if I'm not seeing you, wave your hand.
Oh, sorry, Jane, I was going to ask one more question, if that's okay. How many of the cruise lines do you think are going to survive? Just coming from an industry perspective, like how many will survive this long-term non-capacity, 100% running in the next 2 to 3 years? Because, I mean, they're losing millions every day. And to be held up and laid up and not operating, I can't imagine if this goes on past this year, considering the vaccines are not reliable, considering the tests are not accurate, and considering that vaccines you still need a test, which it doesn't make sense in terms of costs. Who's going to bear all those costs, including
Rita,
the traveler?
I wouldn't even hazard a guess, but what we have seen is that we have seen, you know, as recently as this week, you know, Royal Caribbean divested themselves of one of their smaller groups, and you know, sold it off to a group of investors. We're seeing, you know, we're seeing ships go to break up yards. We're seeing, you know, we're just, I don't know. I haven't got a clue, and I'm certainly, you know, there are people who sit around board tables that I've never been invited to, and you know, they would be the ones that would be musing that question.
Yeah, understandable.
Okay, well, thanks. Donna, I think that's, I mean, we could probably talk about this forever and ever, but Donna, thank you so much. I think that was a great overview of what we needed. So I wish I could give you a present and just hand it right to you.
That's okay. When this is all over, we'll all get together for some really good reason, a celebration. Thanks,
great.
everybody. Yep.
Thanks, Donna.
Thank you.